Please welcome Mike Bonanno of the Yes Men.
All right, well, first of all, I would like to thank the tech staff. Thank you. Seriously, because there's the guy who usually does this is apparently in the hospital, so we hope he gets better soon and is back. But thank you for, filling in a pinch here and getting me up and running without a buzz. And then I also want to thank the curators and the staff here at the museum who have been very generous in hosting us. This is actually what keeps the Yes Men and the Yes Lab, which is our organization that I'll tell you about in a few minutes, going. This is our bread and butter, our lifeblood. And it's our lifeblood for a couple of reasons. We're not only financially invested in this kind of practice, going around and talking about what we do, but also this is about enrolling people, trying to get people involved. And I'll be passing around a piece of paper that I'd like those of you who think you might want to be involved in some way to sign up on. All you need to do is put your email address down, and you will get an email from us eventually after I manage to do the data entry that will explain the next steps to being involved or to participating in some way. So, first of all, Jeff? I love you, but you got it wrong. I mean, I've only known him for a few hours, but we're not doing anything new. I'm sorry to say that, and I'm sorry for those of you who think that maybe the Yes Men have done something new. Maybe you saw something that looked new. We have made things that look new. We made an inflatable golden phallus 3 feet long that was used to represent the World Trade Organization. It was gleaming in gold and looked rather new when it was new. Initially, some of our costumes have looked new, but what we do is actually more of a revival of a very old practice, a practice that is pretty much as old as humanity as far as we can tell. It goes back to the indigenous trickster archetypes of nearly every culture. I say nearly every, I don't know of every culture, but certainly in Western cultures, we have characters like Hermes. In places like what is now the United States, the indigenous populations each had different animals or characters that existed in their mythology as tricksters, as they were usually not very powerful creatures like the rabbit or the raven, ones that you wouldn't expect to win in a fight with a large entity like a bear, but they would use a combination of different clever skills and tricks, often mimicry, shape-shifting, identity changing, in order to, in some way, hold a mirror up to, I like to see it as holding a mirror up to culture, in order to reflect the world around them, and in the process, those around them, at the time those entities or creatures or animals or gods, whatever you have you, would learn something about that world. That character, the sort of trickster, is sort of reborn throughout history. We end up with people like Jonathan Swift, a writer who wrote A Modest Proposal in the 18th century in the United Kingdom. And A Modest Proposal was probably the most famous piece of satire in Western history. And that's where he suggested that the Irish solve the hunger problem by eating their own babies. And it was presented at first as a serious pamphlet. And many people when they start out reading it, they believe it. And that's where the power comes from. It's that shock and that confrontation with the reality. At that time, the reality was that there was plenty of food in Ireland to feed the population of Ireland, but it was being shipped out of Ireland at gunpoint because it was the cash crops, the grains other than the potatoes, that were of value. And the lack that they had was not of food, it was of money. And that is usually what kills people then and today when famine rolls around. It's lack of money. because anybody who has enough money can usually buy food for the time being. I say for the time being, I mean, there are some places where it's still quite hard to get food aid, let's say, or, food even at any price. But for the most part, it comes down to a very unjust system. And in a lot of ways, the yes men, we got started based on a reaction to that injustice, a reaction to unfair trade regimes globally that enforce systems whereby people without money could starve, whereas people with money would not, even if there was food available. So we started out in 1999. There was a movement, a global movement, to oppose the World Trade Organization. And the World Trade Organization was, on the surface, a really great idea. It was an organization whose charter was to help businesses do business. And why not? People believed, or a certain faction of the population believed, that if businesses do business, if trade is allowed to flourish, then everyone will benefit. Well, I don't know. How many of you think that it works that way? And please do tell us. So you think it works that way? It's free trade works for everybody?
No, it works for the majority of people. You need government, but the majority of the people.
Okay, so the idea here is that free trade will work for the majority of the people. Well, maybe that would be a thing to bring up with the people in Mexico, for example, who decided to rebel against the free trade area of the free trade area of the Americas agreement. Post 1992, we had a Zapatista uprising in Chiapas in Mexico. That uprising was a result of the majority of the people suddenly being unable to make a living because corn was being dumped. And corn from the US was being dumped at sub-market prices on Mexico in order to put out of business the indigenous production. Now, the idea behind that is that once you do that, once you squelch indigenous production, then you have a new market that you can take over. We're having a debate. I love it. So, yeah, I'll give you a chance.
Mexico is not as efficient, and they would like to be as efficient. But when it comes to corn production, there is no way Nebraska, corn state, Nebraska and Iowa, they could outbeat Mexico easily. And what they are good at, and what they should be thinking of, and would be better for them, but they're very unable to do that, for reasons we can talk about later, oil. They have tons of oil. They have tons of oil. They have not used their oil wisely. And they're trying to compete against the United States corn market, which could produce corn much cheaper on Nebraska.
Right, but what you're leaving out of the equation there are the original people that you brought up in the first place. The idea that the majority of the people benefit.
They need to learn how to make more money. They can make tons of money, like Saudi Arabia, producing oil. They're not smart.
See, but that is what we're hearing here, actually, this idea that these people, these indigenous farmers, these small land-holding farmers, would be able to suddenly make more money. And once they learn how to make more money, then they'll be able to compete on an international scale with multinational corporations. It's an idea that, and I realize I have the microphone, so we can talk afterward, but, I mean, because it's unfair for me to debate you with standing up here with a huge voice. But in the end, we have a very unfair playing field. We don't have an even playing field. The way that capitalism works is that if you have more money, you can make more money, and you can play. It's kind of like if we played Monopoly, and to start out, I said, okay, we're playing this Monopoly game, but I'm going to have all the money. You can have $1. I'm going to own all the real estate. You can't even have one house. Forget about it. I'm just going to... And if we played that game, chances are pretty good that I'd win. In fact, I think chances are stacked against you. Stacked against you. It's the deck's completely stacked. And that's the situation that people rebelled against throughout the 90s, people all over the world. It was called the Alter or Anti-Globalization Movement. And we had put up a fake website in solidarity with the people who were protesting in Seattle, the now famous battle in Seattle, where activists were actually able to shut down the WTO. They ended up having to cancel the meeting. And we had put up a fake website thinking, oh, we'll just do this as a gesture, but people came across the site, thought it was real, and they started writing us email, asking us questions about global trade. So suddenly we were in a position where we had to become experts. Experts in things like corn dumping. Experts on all kinds of odd questions, like the status of Gibraltar in relation to Europe and the EU. Well, we answered them as best we could, and we were surprised to find out that people were satisfied with the answers. In fact, people kept coming back and asking us more questions, and eventually we started getting invitations. It was helped a little bit by the fact that the Director General of the WTO sent out a press release attacking us, talking about how horrible it was that there were fake websites. Now, it was 1999, and there was a kind of internet bubble that was beginning to pop up. And as that bubble was inflating, people attached an unfair degree of importance to things like fake websites. And so Mike Moore, the Director General of the WTO, this is Mike Moore from New Zealand, not Michael Moore, the filmmaker. Mike Moore, the Director General of the WTO, thought it was incredibly important that there was a fake website. So he held a press conference, denounced it, and as a result, our rankings were right up at the top, just after the WTO's. And anybody who tried to talk to the WTO would usually get very discouraged, because although the motto of the WTO is that they're entirely transparent, because they publish every paper that ever comes out of there on their website, what that essentially means is that if you try to find anything out, you're drowned in papers, legal documents. Finding out one bit of information among millions and millions of pages is like looking for a needle in a haystack. It amounts to a kind of opaque transparency. So our website, on the other hand, was really easy to use. There was a little box where you could just ask a question. You could get in touch with the WTO through our website, only it wasn't really the WTO. We thought that the first time we went and represented them in person, we would simply be kicked out. You know, since about the 1960s, there's been a very popular practice among, I would say, aesthetic activists to bake pies, and they would show up at events where important people were speaking, and they'd smash a pie in their face. So there are various famous people who've been pied, including Bill Gates. Sometimes presidents have been pied. A lot of business people, Milton Friedman. And we thought that this was our equivalent of throwing a pie in somebody's face. If we would go, pretend to be the WTO, make some absurd announcements on their behalf, absurd but within the logic of the sort of free trade order. So we suggested at a conference in Salzburg, Austria, for an audience of international trade lawyers, that they open a free market in democracy by allowing corporations to sell votes to the highest bidder, right? So basically, if you were a user of voteauction.com, you could just put your vote up to bid on a website, and the corporations could buy them in bulk. We expected that would elicit some amount of outrage. It didn't. The audience sort of tacitly agreed. They didn't respond enthusiastically. They just politely nodded in approval. We suggested outlawing the siesta in Spain. It gets in the way of work, right? Strangely, that also met with approval, silent approval, but approval nonetheless. And strangely enough, we actually discovered that it wasn't that far off of the reality. Not in Spain, but in Mexico, Fox's government, at the time it was Fox who was president, had already outlawed the siesta in government offices. So that schedule was no longer appropriate in government offices there. So our wildest fantasies about what might be illegal under the new regimes of harmonization and free trade were actually not that far from what was already being proposed. Now, the voteauction.com thing was kind of funny because it actually was a project of a graduate student of mine at the time, and he ended up having the FBI knocking at his door, and he was doing it the whole thing was a hoax. It was just pretending to be selling votes to the highest bidder. But people take that very seriously, or at least law enforcement does. And so they came to his dorm room, and seized his computers and talked to me on the phone, FBI agents. They were really polite. It was fine. They gave him back his computers. He got representation from the ACLU. The trial went on for a long time, but he was acquitted. There's no risks to this kind of activity, believe me. No, it was all a fiction. It was all just a fiction, but you have to use the tools that are at your disposal today. Back when writing was fairly new, people started writing books. And for a while, that was pretty impressive. People started memorizing speeches, using theater. Today, we've got all these media tools available. We've got websites, we've got video, the internet, and so this is just a matter of telling those same tales that the trickster characters did in mythology, but doing it today. And it gets weirder and weirder to reflect contemporary civilization. And weirder because things have gotten so insane, right? So out of balance, so precarious. We know today that we are driving this ship off a precipice. And when I say this ship, maybe I'm mixing metaphors. The planet is seriously in danger. Not the planet itself, that goes on, it's in the solar system, etc., geologic time, but civilization is in danger. Because right now we've kind of mortgaged everything. When I say mortgage everything, we keep polluting the atmosphere, even though we know that it's causing the climate to spin out of control. And we're seeing it, and I'm really upset to say that the scientists were wrong. The scientists were wrong. They thought that climate change was going to happen more slowly than it's happening. This is 10 years ago even. The predictions of science were that we had until 2100 before we hit the 2 degree Celsius change in temperature. That means that things basically spin completely out of control. When I say spin out of control, a 2 degrees shift, which is 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit, may sound like nothing, but what that doesn't take into account are the extremes, right? So if we have 100-degree days in the summer, the spikes mean that we'll have 115-degree days in the summer. It's the spikes and the valleys. It's about things getting unpredictable. And that unpredictability is happening now. There are a few people who still don't think that Sandy had some relationship to climate change. There are a few people who don't think that the droughts in the Midwest had a relationship to climate change. There are a few people who also refuse to acknowledge that the fires that are going on in Australia right now and the floods that just happened over there have anything to do with it. I hope they're right. I really hope they're right. I'd love to wake up tomorrow and find out that this is not anything we have to worry about. But until then, it seems like the challenge for everybody, and no matter what form of cultural production you're in, or what form of other production, manufacturing, thinking, sleeping, it seems like everybody's goal should be to try to fix this problem. It's become the only problem in a way, because every other problem is attached to it. It's a problem that's tied to our economy. Anybody here read Bill McKibben's article about the money invested in the fossil fuel industry? It was in Rolling Stone, and it's called Global Warming's Terrifying New Math. All right. Well, this is the story. The reason it's terrifying math is that the foundation of our economy right now is fossil fuels. And the foundation of the sort of money system right now is based on predictions about what the value of companies will be in the future, right? Because it's all about the stock market. And your stock price is basically the value that your company has in the future, what you're going to be able to produce later. Now, at the moment, the fossil fuel industries own enough and have claims on enough fuel that's in the ground, enough fossil fuel, particularly coal and oil, to basically doom civilization entirely, right? They claim to own that much, and their value is based on that ownership. So the existing stakes, the discoveries that we know are there, that they plan to extract, that their future value is bet upon, means that we'll pass the tipping point of what is acceptable for a livable future on planet Earth for humans. So that's the problem right there. Therein lies the rub, right? It's like we're in jeopardy. We're being held hostage in some ways by the fossil fuel industry, and for some reason, most of the governments on the planet aren't doing anything about it, even though they know full well that by not doing anything about it, they're dooming, not necessarily most of the people in this room, but the young people in this room, to a very, very difficult future, right? This is a war on the young. It's a war on the young. And young people have to rise up. It's either now or never. So, with that kind of religious end times kind of speech, I'm here to say that I have a lot of hope still, right? I mean, this isn't your typical art talk, I suppose. But I don't think anybody need talk about anything else anymore. It's like during the Second World War, suddenly people weren't doing very much art talk anymore in the traditional way. Everything was about the war effort, right? Everything was about the war effort. And the government legislated. They created new rules. It wasn't like the desire for passenger cars suddenly disappeared in the United States. The desire was there, the money was there. There was a market. If the car companies could have done it, they would have kept selling passenger cars. But the government said, it's illegal, you can't make them anymore. You now have to make tanks and planes. And guess what? In 6 months, the entire production lines of the auto industry were converted into making something that was entirely different than what they'd been making. And when I say entirely different, not entirely different. They were still making things with wheels. They were still making things with bodies. But they converted their entire assembly lines to making something different. Now, why can't we do that today, right? This is the thing. This is a massive opportunity. It's a massive opportunity. We know how to make windmills. We could do it. We know how to, the technology exists to convert and to relocalize. And relocalizing, which means not shipping corn to Mexico, but letting people in Mexico grow corn and growing corn for local consumption, relocalizing is a no-brainer. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. If you fix the climate problem, you fix a whole lot of social justice problems. So we've been working on this with the Yes Men, but we have our own methods, right? Because basically, One of the problems is just getting the issues on the radar, getting enough people invested, getting enough people to care. It's very hard to care about this stuff because for one thing, it's depressing. For a second, it feels futile. You know, how do you fight against a monolithic system? How do you fight against the billions of dollars that the fossil fuel industry spends lobbying Congress? How do you fight that? Well, we use humor. And I'm going to show you a video clip of something that we did when the UN was meeting in 2009 in New York. Obama had just been elected. Obama was talking tough about the climate. Obama was going to help fix it, right? I mean, he just said they would again. But he said that 4 years ago when he was in the election the first time around. And this was the big meeting of the UN in New York City. And a lot of activists were coming from all over the world. Activists from places like the Maldives. The Maldives is a country that is going to be underwater within 50 years. They're trying to buy land in other countries so that they can, you know, have a new homeland to go to. So, you know, they were in New York, they were protesting, we were joining them, and this is our contribution right here. Hi, this is Mike reporting to you from the Frankenstorm. Thank you so much for getting us past the $50,000, 1,000 donor mark. We really appreciate it. We need your help. Despite everything crazy that's going on with the weather, neither political candidate in the presidential election of the United States mentioned climate change once in the debates. With storms like this, we need a revolution that's going to actually put this on the political agenda.
They call it couture for climate calamity, otherwise known as inflatable balls you slip into.
This should be interesting. CNN's Jeannie Mose has the story of climate change protesters having a ball wearing balls.
Oh my gosh.
They looked like a bunch of beached balls.
An amazing new product that just might save your life. The Survivaball.
So today we're launching Balls Across America.
Everybody ready with the turtle position in case of a terrorist attack.
Maybe they were mistaken for a terrorist attack. 21 Survivaballs preparing to head upriver toward the UN, where world leaders were talking climate change. No wonder first one police boat showed up, then several more.
They had a helicopter above us with a guy like tethered outside the helicopter like this, ready to leap.
The Survivaball stunt brought to you by the Yes Men, who not so coincidentally are promoting their new movie featuring anti-corporate stunts they've pulled, like impersonating a Dow Chemical spokesman, managing to fool the BBC.
For the first time, Dow is accepting full responsibility for the Bhopal catastrophe.
Frequently cited as the world's worst industrial disaster. In honor of the UN Climate Summit, the Yes Men put out a fake copy of the New York Post and followed that with this, a waterborne assault on the UN by survivor balls meant to help mankind survive.
Ice age, hurricanes, droughts.
It's a gated community for one.
Not a very comfortable one.
You may have to duck in a little bit.
Doesn't make me look fat,
No,
though.
you're looking good.
Am I inflating?
You're inflating. Some of these actually fit much better.
And though the Survivaball protest was accompanied by the song, I Will Survive, the protest didn't survive long. Minutes after wading into the water, the Survivaballs were in retreat, and one of the two main Yes Men was cuffed and taken away.
Oh, here, I'll come around the back. I'm in right behind you. Excuse me?
Yes.
It actually goes over your head like this.
Oh, sorry. This is one climate change protest that ended up on the rocks. Jeannie Mose, CNN, New York.
Okay, so they can survive a drought, they can survive an ice age,
Yeah, a
but
gated
not
community.
the police.
A gated community for one. I love it. That's really thinking outside the ball.
Oh, goodness. You had to go
Oh
there.
my gosh, that's my Halloween costume. How
such a
awesome is
great
that?
idea.
Yay.
Oh,
Thanks,
fantastic.
Survivaball. And thank you for waking up with us.
You're watching Kids.
Okay, so yeah, I guess, that's all in good fun. We do it basically for the media. That was a show. That really only worked because Andy got arrested. Incidentally, the secret is that he only got arrested because he had an outstanding bicycle ticket. They took everyone's ID and they saw who had a warrant out for them, or their arrest. And strangely, luckily, Andy had a warrant because he had been riding his bike through the park, which you're not allowed to do in New York in some parks. And a cop gave him a ticket and he never paid it. So, of course, it was our lucky day because that meant that then we could take the tape of him being arrested, rush it all over to CNN, and get them to put it on primetime. Basically, this thing ran in heavy rotation and was syndicated all over the country. But the purpose of it was to talk about what could happen, what was really going on. I mean, to illustrate it in an absurdly silly but straightforward metaphor, and that is that we have some very wealthy people who, for whatever reasons, are simply building their fortifications around their private islands and not really paying attention to the signs out there, not really caring to heed the warnings. And this is not stupid people. These are not uneducated people. We're talking about CEOs of oil companies, and with some notable exceptions, most of them are incredibly educated and know exactly what's going on. If you talk to Peter Vosser, the head of Shell, educated in Switzerland, he has a lot of expertise in the field. He knows exactly what's happening with climate change. So there are criminals in this. They are building their survivaballs. And the basic fact of the matter is that the more money you have, the better off you'll be. It's just like in Jonathan Swift's time, when if you had money in Ireland during the famine, you could buy food because food was being produced locally, right? It's the case almost anywhere in the world right now, even if there is famine. If you have money, you can get food. In the future, in the immediate future, even now, if you have money in a climate change affected place, you'll be fine. If you don't, you're screwed. There's already 300,000 people a year dying from the effects of climate change. Those are UN figures. They're not some crazy activist organization. It's just the UNDP. And they come to those figures through meticulous scientific studies. But they say that those numbers are going to double almost every 2 years. So it's kind of exponential. It's a thing that's spinning out. And there's places like India where they're building walls. You know how we have a wall between here and Mexico? In India, they're building a wall to keep out the climate refugees from Bangladesh, because there will be so many climate refugees from Bangladesh with the rising sea levels, but more precisely with everything that happens as a result of those extreme weather events. They have so much low-lying territory, and when the monsoon season hits, the weather gets so much more extreme that things like the surge will wipe out what's going on in most of the lowlands which are used for farming. It's a huge percentage of the agricultural land. So that means famine, that means migration. Migration means India's building a wall because they wouldn't know what to do with millions and millions of Bangladeshis trying to get into the country. So people are preparing, but they're not preparing in the way that one might expect, except for in a few places. And again, back to the hope, there's places where people are meeting the emissions targets. There are places that aren't necessarily where you'd expect to find the best renewable energy sources. Germany. I mean, Germany happens to be pretty wealthy. That helps. But even though Germany took all their nuclear plants offline, they're still just behind the targets that they were setting for reducing their emissions by 80% by 2020. So that's a large, modern industrial economy, the strongest in Europe, the only people with money. And guess what? they're converting their economy to one that's not fossil fuel free, but one that's operating within the margins of risk that most of the scientists said was okay 10 years ago. All right, so what's the problem with all this? Why can't we do anything? Why doesn't our government, with all the knowledge they have, do something about it? And, they have knowledge. I mean, it's not just the science people, it's not just the EPA, it's also the military. The military plans for this. I mean, that's why we have walls in places like India. The Defense Department plans for it. During Bush's administration, the Defense Department published a paper on what to do about climate change and climate refugees, and how a defensive strategy for the weather changes that were expected to occur. So it's not being ignored in every sector. But one of the big reasons why it's being ignored is that our democracies have become completely disconnected from the people, really. I mean, we have a chance to vote, but that's about it. Politicians are, in a nutshell, bought and sold. There's an organization called Global Exchange. They recently did a survey. They gathered data from all kinds of transparency organizations and government sources to find out which politicians were getting money from the fossil fuel industry and how. And they found out that all of them were. Every single one. There's not a single sitting congressman or senator who doesn't get money for the fossil fuel industry. And that doesn't have an effect necessarily on the way that they vote. They might vote against a bill that the industry is pushing every time, but they still end up getting money from them. And it's kind of like a hedge fund, or it's kind of like somebody hedging their bets, right? The industry just spreads money everywhere. And because they're spreading money everywhere, they become humanized. What happens are they're allowed to have corridor chats. There are thousands of lobbyists have access, even to the most left-wing, communist sitting in office today in the US. Even somebody who hates the fossil fuel industry with a passion meets and gets thousands of dollars from them, has private meetings with them, right? Now, I challenge you all to go and try to get a private meeting with your senator right now. It's not going to be simple. You can walk through there.
It is easy.
When's the last time you met with your federal senator?
You go and make an appointment. You go and get a tour. You see your senator. He says hi, goodbye.
Precisely.
You don't have a long talk. He says hi, hello, goodbye.
It's possible to witness them. This is true. It's possible to witness them, but you may not have a real audience with them. So anyway, part of the reason that happens is all the money that's allowed to flow through government. And there are a few places in the world where the democracies have outlawed money because, there's a few reasons why money gets in the way of speech, even though here, with cases like Citizens United, it's ruled to have an equal weight. But one of the biggest organizations in the world, lobbying organizations, is the US Chamber of Commerce. And a group of activists got in touch with us soon after the survivable thing, and they said, hey, you guys need to attack the US Chamber of Commerce. And we said, what do you mean we need to attack them? We don't know anything about them. And we honestly didn't at the time, which is kind of embarrassing, but we really thought of the Chamber of Commerce as a couple of little old people, sort of octogenarian do-gooders who were helping, give tours of our hometown, because there's all these local chambers of commerce that make up tours. They're sort of like they coordinate parties. But the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is a lot different. And we like to think of them as sort of the ultimate hoax, right? Because they've taken this name, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. They sound like they're a wing of government. They have a logo with an eagle on it. They're located in a big building directly across from the White House. You have the White House here, you have the U.S. Chamber of Commerce here. But the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is a private organization has nothing to do with the government. In fact, it fights against the government because its duty is to tear down government regulation, tear up any agreements that might, things that they fought against. Maybe things we take for granted now, a 40-hour work week. You know, they fight to eliminate the minimum wage. They fight against a lot of basic rights that workers have accrued over the years, and they fight against environmental regulations. So for years, they were behind a lot of lobbying to deny climate change and to make sure that there were no agreements that went through Congress. And these activists said, you know, they're coming under a lot of scrutiny now because by now most of the world sees that they're actually being completely maniacal, deranged sociopaths. And the US needs to see that too. And so we thought, well, we'll try to help. And this is what happened.
We wanted to make a political point about an organization that's pulling off some of the world's biggest hoaxes. No, not this organization. The one across the street. The one that looks like a US government office, but really is working against the government. In reality, the US Chamber of Commerce is a large corporation that is reported to lie to the public on behalf of even bigger corporations. They spend nearly $500,000 a day trying to convince the US government to do really stupid shit, like killing environmental regulations and undermining workers' rights. But since they spend so much money on their hoaxes, many people believe them.
And as it says, American Free Enterprise dream big, but their dreams are our nightmares because their plans are to prevent us from passing climate change legislation, which means we're screwed.
Since the Chamber was hoaxing us all, we decided to fight fire with fire. We would reveal one of their biggest lies by masquerading as them. We would hold a press conference as the Chamber at the National Press Club. How would the world react to the Chamber suddenly reversing its position on climate change?
But a reversal on climate change from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It will reverse its position on the climate change bill and wants a carbon tax, if you will. All right, so the U.S. Chamber is denying it now. All right, so maybe not. Apparently it was a hoax. Either there is a group or some people or a person.
Is there any involvement of the White House whatsoever?
I couldn't even begin to go there, Larry. This is the item we got. It has the Chamber's logo that we're all very familiar with.
Today, the country's largest business lobby, the Chamber of Commerce, got punked. It began early this morning when a press release went out, purportedly from the United States Chamber of Commerce. Amazingly, the release said that the Chamber would now support this legislation that it's spent months fighting against. Reporters were surprised and probably confused at this odd turn of events, but that was nothing compared to what actually happened at the press conference when it was held later on this morning. Watch this tape.
Clean coal is a technology that has not only not been proven, it basically doesn't exist.
Okay, this is, I'm Eric Wolfschlegel. I'm with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. This is not an official U.S. Chamber of Commerce event. So I don't know what pretenses you're here. I know some of you in the press world, but this is a fraudulent press activity and a stunt.
Who are you really, sir?
And do you have a business card? Are you with the U.S. Chamber?
I do. We can discuss afterwards.
Okay. Can I see your business card?
Can I see yours?
Are you here representing the U.S. Chamber of Commerce?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well, I work there, and you do not look familiar to me at all.
Could I see your business
Is this
card?
a stunt?
Could I see your business
Is this
card?
a stunt?
Are you interrupting the president?
Yes, I am. And this guy does not represent the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
Can we finish the
Okay? No. This is not an official Chamber of Commerce. This is not, what is your position at the Chamber of Commerce?
I just spoke my position.
We've got working. What is your title and your official title at the U.S. Chamber
I'm
of
the
Commerce?
assistant to Mr. Donahue.
Okay. This guy is a fraud. He's lying. This is, a stunt that I've never seen before. So if you'd like to actually talk to the legitimate Chamber of Commerce, I've got my business cards outside. This gentleman, I will assure you, does not have any business cards, and he's not legitimate.
Show me your business card. No, show me yours. No, show me yours.
They both look like imposters. What? It's
You got a business card?
It's so weird, though. But
You don't look familiar.
The U.S. Chamber of Commerce says it was victimized.
Victims of a hoax by environmental activists.
A hoax actually led to the chamber admitting that there is a challenge for climate change. It seems like a good first step. So next up, hoaxes about poverty, violence,
education.
Education.
The big education hoax. We've got a big education hoax in this country.
The hoax is a good first step.
Yeah.
Just today, the Chamber of Commerce changed positions, not courtesy of the yes men with that stunt in Washington a few weeks ago, but they're now saying, surprisingly to me, and I'm glad about it, that they want to get legislation, and they're now working with the sponsors of the bill.
All right, so yeah, check the time. I like to answer questions as we go along, and so if anybody has anything they'd like to know about this, go ahead and ask away. I'll keep talking otherwise.
I'm just curious, do you have a business card so we know you're actually
I do. I do have a business card, yeah. I have several, in fact. Different names on them. I have somebody else's business card from today in the plane. Yep. Yeah, I could give you this one here. Strangely from this, people often ask if there's any risks involved in doing this kind of thing. And the answer is no. Although we do occasionally get legal threats. And you get used to that. And they're just threats. They're letters. They're generally fairly harsh. Like they say they'll take your firstborn child and adapt them to their purposes or something,
You haven't had any physical threat. I watched, the one where you guys took down $2 billion in Dow stock,
Yeah.
I got to think there's somebody out there that $10,000 to have somebody hurt you would be nothing for them,
Yeah, there is that concern. That's a legitimate concern, the physical threat thing. I think that we are enjoying a lack of physical threat simply because generally our targets are, these big corporations with a brand to protect, and it's just, it would be too much of a risk for them to engage in that kind of activity. Now, if we were doing something like targeting the porn industry, I'm sure that within 5 minutes we would get physical threats. As actually one of my grad students who did that did get. This was very funny actually. He had set up a website. He was an art student, and he decided that he was going to become a porn king. And it seemed kind of odd. He just announced this one day, and next thing you know, the guy who used to be called Victor was called Cintron. And Cintron, his last name was actually Cintron. And but he spelled it with an S instead of a C. And he just went by the one name, and he wore a black suit and a lot of gold chains, and he just became this porn king and put up a couple of websites. This was in the 90s still, about 1998. And one of them was called sportsstockssex.com, and it was just a stock ticker and sex and sports. And another one, it was very funny. I thought that was hilarious. One-stop shopping. And then another one was called simplesexsite.com, and this was his masterpiece. And to build simplesexsite.com, he had first created a game. And the game was a vector graphics first-person shooter browser, which is weird. I mean, you don't really see browsers like this today. You didn't see them then. It was a browser, but it was a browser devised as a game, and you could move around in the web space with your joystick, going through this sort of vector graphics that looked like Tron, And as you moved around, you would see JPEGs, but you didn't see the images of JPEGs. It was the web was way too primitive for that. You just saw the links themselves. But apparently, people who surfed porn enough at that time knew how to recognize a porn JPEG based on what it said, simply because it would say something suggestive and then .jpg, right? And so he got all these people playing this game that was a harvester of links. So it's a link harvester web browser game where they'd navigate around and they'd be shooting these links, and then the links were harvested and stuck into this website called simplesexsite.com, which all that it did was show the image on the original website without linking through to it. Now what this means, by not linking through to it, it meant that nobody was clicking through to their website. It was showing within a frame on his website. The entire revenue model at that time of pornography on the internet was based on click-throughs. So there were these sort of micropayments for everybody who was surfing the porn. They would go to another site. So it basically destroyed their commercial model entirely. And I said to him, damn, Victor, this is, and he's like, Syntron. I'm like, damn, Syntron, this is pretty amazing. This is really, I mean, it's kind of great. You've like liberated, porn. It's from, there's no advertising anymore. There's no, and you've got this army of weird people who are working for you for free, harvesting this stuff. And, it's the labor of thousands of people. And within a week, he had massive amounts of traffic, and, he was a porn king. That was within a week. And within 8 days, he had a phone call in the morning, and there was a guy on the line. He said, if you don't take down your website, I'm going to come break your legs. And he's like, oh, okay. And he put the phone down, and then he got another call 15 minutes later. And this time it was a conference call. And there were 7 guys on the call. And the 7 guys each identified themselves. They said, hello, I'm so-and-so, I'm so-and-so, so-and-so. Yeah, we run the 7 biggest porn sites on the net, and you're stealing from us, and we're going to come and kill you in an hour unless you take down your website. And so I think Victor sort of thought, well, kill me, take down my website. Kill me. It doesn't seem like a prank call. There's 7 guys on the line. So he took down the website, and then they called him back, and they said, yeah, we're glad you took down your website. That's great. Now, this is the thing. Either you come work for us, or you put up your website again and we kill you. And he was like, huh, okay, interesting. Is that the only choice? And they said, nah, you can do whatever you want. Just, we're not going to. But basically, there are people who will come and who will threaten you with physical violence, and I'm sure would follow through. I'm sure he would have been forced to take down the website one way or another, because there was no, what I didn't realize also as his advisor was that although he had circumvented all of this legal infrastructure and he was doing this, kind of crazy thing, it had nothing to do with the law. The area that he was working in was something else, And there are many places in the world where you couldn't be doing this kind of thing without exposing yourself to extra legal, action of some kind. But we target mostly corporations with brands that are vulnerable. And that's also what inoculates us in a way against legal repercussions. Because if they sue us, it only works out well for us. Because they put their brand at risk. They have something to lose. We don't really have anything to lose. They have a lot to lose, and they usually have a lot to hide. And it could be very fun to go into the discovery process. That's what when you're being sued or you're suing somebody, there's a process by which you can look at any documents that relate to the case. And when these guys, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who have sued us, get into discovery with us, it might be a stretch, but it'll be interesting to see what kinds of things we can requisition to look at that they would rather remain secret. So, yeah, it's basically an opportunity. That kind of threat is an opportunity.
craft your message, but in terms of brainstorming these balls that are gated community, or even brainstorming this Chamber of Commerce press conference, like, do people come to you, or is this just you and your buddy brainstorming ideas and just figuring out what would be cool to implement?
Right. We have a new thing called the Yes Lab. For years, we operated as a kind of cell. You know, just a couple of guys and our friends. And we did these interventions at conferences and business meetings. But then we began to work with other organizations, especially after 9/11, when things got a little weird. There was this whole anti-globalization movement that we were a part of, and we could kind of operate as a cell within this broader movement, and it made sense. But afterward, there was a way in which the movement was kind of broken by the different policing strategies. That was a time at which there were massive protests on the streets, and then suddenly there were these crazy crackdowns on simply a lot of people standing in the street. And when it became really brutal out there in the streets at protests, the movement really shifted. And we ended up shifting our tactics too, because we realized that without a movement behind us, or without plugging into a movement, what we were really doing was more hit and run. It was just one issue at a time. And so we needed to connect what we were doing to the campaigns of organizations that were working very hard to change laws, that had specific goals, and that needed a bump in publicity at a specific time. The thing that we did against Dow Chemical, where we represented them on the BBC, was actually set up in part in tandem with Greenpeace, who was working to try to make sure that the world remembered that they were responsible for the Bhopal catastrophe. Because Dow bought Union Carbide, which was the company that caused the disaster, but when they bought it, I think that they expected that they would be able to get away with sort of washing away that history. You know, a simple rebranding that then eliminates all of that kind of emotional liability that they had, that the old company had. And Greenpeace wanted the world to remember, along with the Bhopal activists, because they were working very closely with people in Bhopal on that campaign. And they started talking to us about it, and that's how we ended up getting into that. But it wouldn't have made sense for us to do that without a lot more effort going into that campaign, a lot more effort going into holding them accountable. And hopefully, in the best case scenario, it's in tandem with some kind of legislative initiative. When there's some law that is being pushed forward that would make for progressive change, and one of the problems is that there's not enough public pressure on the representatives to vote for it, that's when you need a little publicity boost. That's when you need that kind of momentum. And so that's when we were most effective. So over the years, because we produced movies and everything, a lot of organizations would write emails to us, and sometimes individuals, and they would just say, we want to do what you're doing for our issue, or we want you to do something on our issue, is usually what they'd say. And so eventually we came to the realization that we could not do everything that anybody wanted, but we could maybe train people to do it themselves. And so that's why we now have this thing called the Yes Lab. And we've been working with organizations on a project-by-project basis. We get together, we brainstorm an idea for a project together on an issue of their choice that they're working on, and we come up with an idea, usually. We settle on an idea and then figure out with them how to execute it. I'll show you an example of one of those projects that I think is really funny, and this has nothing to do really with the climate change issue. This is 3 Strikes You're In, and the video will tell the whole thing. It's just a news clip, so it'll explain the action pretty much in entirety.
Well, it seemed like a joke from the start. If you are stopped and frisked 3 times by the NYPD, you get a free Happy Meal. Well, it wasn't fake, but the ad and the website where it came from spread quickly online and had some believing it was true. Eyewitness News reporter Kristen Thorne shows us what happened and who was behind it.
That's why we're excited to introduce our new 3 Strikes, You're In initiative. While the NYPD can't stop using stop and frisk, McDonald's can help police reward law-abiding citizens.
McDonald's and the NYPD teaming up to get guns and drugs off the streets seems strange. Well, it should. It's part of a spoof website called 3strikesyou'rein.org.
Every time you are stopped, frisked, and released, simply fill out your name, ethnicity, date and time of stop, and the officer's badge number. After 3 stops, you're in. Bring your completed voucher to your nearest McDonald's and exchange it for a free Happy Meal.
People talk about broken window policing, but we'd like them to think about issues like what happens in a young person's mind when they know that when they leave the house, they're targeted.
Jerry Goralnik and Diva Durant created the site. They're with a local activist group called People Enraged by Racial Policing. The NYPD stops and frisks some 600,000 people every year. Critics say it encourages racial profiling. The department says it's a vital way to reduce violent crime.
We wanted to make the connection between race and bias-based policing.
What's disturbing is their satire could actually be taken as real. Goralnik and Durant put it to the test, sending one of their own into a local McDonald's with one of the fake vouchers.
You get stopped more than 3 times by a police officer, you get a free Happy Meal.
The manager looks at the voucher, ponders it for a second, and then puts in the order. We reached out to the NYPD about all this, but they didn't get back to us. A spokeswoman for McDonald's says she's glad we realized this entire thing is just made up. As for the site, 3 strikes you're in, it was taken down within hours of being posted because of a copyright infringement. In Sunnyside, Queens, Kristen Thorne, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Okay, so that's an example of one of the projects, one of many that we've done in recent years as part of the Yes Lab scheme, which started about 2 years ago. Right now, we're actually expanding the whole project. We're putting together a new film. We seem to release a film once every 4 years or so. So we're due to release one around the end of this year. And the new film is called The Yes Men Are Revolting. And we're trying. The film this time is actually more like a launch pad, because usually when you make a film, you finish the film and it's done, and people watch it and then it sits on the shelf. But this one we're seeing as the beginning. It's launching a thing that we're calling the Action Switchboard, which is kind of like a social network for people doing creative activist projects. We already have a database of about 100,000 people who have volunteered to work on projects in various capacities. So some people say, have a specific area of expertise, and they say, for example, I'm a web designer, I'll build a website. And other people there may be somebody who works in a print shop, or there may be somebody who knows how to ride a unicycle. It's all kinds of weird skills in this database, which is geo-targeted. And so we're kind of turning that mailing list that we've already got into something a little bit more powerful. And it'll be kind of like a Match.com for creative activists. Some of the things that we would request that people participate in are really simple. It's like simply get a press release and propagate it. So, post it on Facebook, send an email to somebody else. So it's about spreading social media information. But sometimes it's much more complicated. If somebody fills out their profile on site and says that they want to direct a new project and they have an idea, then we'll help them find people who can participate, either in their region if that's what's required, or anywhere in the world if it's something where people can work on it remotely. So that's the newest project, and hopefully it'll be ready by 2014. I mean, this year, 2013, we're going to finish it, but that doesn't mean, then there's the whole process of going to film festivals and marketing it and making sure that we have enough weight behind it to actually get it into the world in a way that has impact. Any questions?
Actually, a question, but that one reminded me of it. The last video. I was wondering how you guys do avoid, because the power of what you guys do lies in using other people's brands to kind of present your message. How do you avoid copyright infringement, like the New York Post stuff?
Yeah.
Maybe I just don't know.
Well, no, I think it's pretty simple. First of all, it's very important to understand that what we do is not illegal. To our knowledge, we've never done anything illegal. And we have proof of that. We've never been prosecuted, right? The state has never, in fact, we've never even been arrested by police of any state, except for Andy for the bicycle ticket. And for some other things, but they're not to do with this kind of work. No, I mean, just whatever, wrong place, the wrong time, or standing at a protest. I mean, you can get arrested for all kinds of really stupid things if you accidentally, like bicycle riding, for example. But we've never, this kind of activity is not illegal. There are people, in fact, the majority of people, and certainly the vast majority of lawyers who ask will tell you that it is. But they're wrong. Lawyers are trained. Are there lawyers here? Probably a few. Typically, they tell you when you're in law school that copyright is for the protection of the author, and that trademark is for the protection of the brand or the owner. And there's this idea that there's fair use, right? And fair use can be interpreted any number of different ways. Now, there's case history on either side. There's a lot of, in the case like this where there's not really a clear-cut example of what fair use is and isn't, you have to interpret what is allowable under the law based on case history. And case history falls all over the board. In the case of copyright in particular, but trademark as well. And so you end up with these situations where it comes down to, in the end, a judge. And usually it's the judge's opinion that matters. But we have pro bono lawyers called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a great organization. They represent us for free, and they would argue on behalf of the sort of liberal interpretation of the law of fair use and trademark. And they say that what we're doing is totally legal, and I choose to believe them because they're my lawyer. And also they're invested in protecting people's right to speak, right? And we see this as a tradition that dates all the way back, right? And when I say all the way back, I'm not talking about English law, Western law. I mean, this goes all the way back to the raven's right to assume the shape of another animal, right? They did it back then, and it was an important part of culture. I mean, I'm not saying they did it, they didn't do it, but this is part of our belief system. It's so ingrained in every culture. We have, the Greece. If we're going to go back to Greece, there's Hermes. There are these characters who are engaged in these sort of practices. And the bottom line is that when it comes down to it, we reveal very quickly that we are not Dow. We reveal very quickly, within a matter of hours at most, that we are not McDonald's and we are not the NYPD. The net goal is to create more information in the public, to make these issues more accessible, to increase understanding. It's not to hoodwink people. It's not to fool people permanently. And that's what industries like the fossil fuel industry are engaged in right now. They're spending billions and billions of dollars to create massive lies that are incredibly dangerous, that they never want revealed. So, yeah.